Good morning. The world is counting on COP27 to deliver significant emissions-cutting measures in response to the mounting climate risks that our generation is facing, including extreme heat, erratic precipitation, and more frequent and powerful climate disasters. Today, as we count down towards COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, we must not forget that climate change will not only have direct physical implications in MENA countries, but will also have significant effects on the economy, human potential, and growth in the region. The MENA region is among the most vulnerable places in the world to the economic and social consequences of climate change for three key reasons. First, poverty rates in the region are among the highest in the world. Second, MENA has some of the highest inequality rates in the world. Third, most MENA countries have limited fiscal space to provide a robust welfare system and to develop adequate mitigation plans in reaction to exogenous shocks. Our discussion today will focus on the economic and social costs of climate change in MENA countries. We will highlight the important interlinkages between climate action, economic growth, poverty, and inequality. I cannot think of a more fascinating panel for this discussion than the one we have today. We are very grateful to and honored by the participation of our distinguished speakers, whom I will introduce to you now, starting with the keynote speaker, followed by the high-level government officials, and then international organizations and the private sector. I'm very honored to welcome our exceptional keynote speaker and world-class pioneer in the field of sustainable development, Professor Jeffrey Sachs. Professor Sachs is the president of the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network and director of the Center for Sustainable Development at Columbia University. He also is the chair of the Lancet COVID-19 Commission, co-chair of the Council of Engineers for the Energy Transition, and commissioner of the UN Broadband Commission for Development. He has been special advisor for 3 United Nations Secretaries General and currently serves as an SDG advocate under Secretary General Antonio Guterres. From the government side, we're truly honored to host Her Excellency Dr. Yasmin Fuad, Egyptian Minister of Environment. Her Excellency is also the COP27 envoy and ministerial coordinator. Dr. Yasmin Fuad has over 20 years of experience in environmental affairs and international cooperation through work in government, UN organizations, NGOs, and academia. As Minister of Environment, Dr. Fuad leads the transformational change in the environmental sector in Egypt. She has developed Egypt's waste management and environmental sustainability strategies, and she has initiated the first government green bond in Egypt and the MENA region at large. We're equally thrilled to welcome Ambassador Majid Al-Suwaidi, Executive Vice President of COP28 UAE organizing team. Ambassador Majid Al-Suwaidi is the former ambassador of the United Arab Emirates to the Kingdom of Spain and the lead negotiator representing the UAE in the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. He has been a leading negotiator for the climate agreement in Paris. Previously, Ambassador Al-Suwaidi held several academic positions and fulfilled multiple leading roles in various multinational corporations, including ExxonMobil and Zatco. He also served as first consul of the UAE in New York. From the international organization side, we are so proud to welcome Dr. Mahmoud Mohieddin, climate high-level champion for COP27 and special envoy on financing the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development of the United Nations. Dr. Mohieddin is a leading economist with more than 30 years of experience in international finance and development. He also is the former Minister of Investment of Egypt, and most recently he served as the World Bank Group Senior Vice President for the UN 2030 Development Agenda. We are also very proud to welcome Dr. Murad Wahba, Special Advisor to the Administrator of the United Nations Development Program, UNDP. Dr. Wahba spent 26 years of his career at the UNDP, where he previously was Director of the Regional Bureau for Arab States. He has also taken up the post of Chair of the Regional United Nations Sustainable Development Group. And finally, from the private sector, we're so proud to have with us today Mr. Eric Pawlowski, Deputy Chief of Staff and Vice President at the Rockefeller Foundation. Prior to his current role, Mr. Pawlowski served as Senior Director of International Affairs for Shell in the United States. He spent over 16 years in government service across three administrations. Mr. Pawlowski was Special Assistant to President Barack Obama and Senior Director for North America and Yemen at the White House. He also served as a senior advisor for 2 U.S. permanent representatives to the United Nations. Welcome to all our distinguished speakers. Professor Sachs, now the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. What a great honor to be asked to give a few opening remarks with such a remarkable panel. Let me start by thanking Minister Fouad and the whole Egyptian government for the marvelous preparations for COP27 in recent months, and also my dear friend Mahmoud Moheldin, who is a world leader in these issues and is helping the government and the international system to get the most possible out of COP27, and he's doing an absolutely remarkable job. I don't think I need to belabor the obvious, but I will start by mentioning an article that people should read, which just came out in the Reviews of Geophysics, an article called Climate Change and Weather Extremes in the Eastern Mediterranean and the Middle East. It's a very, very sobering article because the gist of it is that the Eastern Mediterranean, North Africa, and the Middle East is going to be one of the hardest hit parts of the world by the climate change underway. The warming in this region is far higher than the world average. The current trajectory is for a several degree increase of temperatures. They point to scenarios showing up to a 5 degrees C warming by the end of the century, which would be completely unlivable. And when you combine that with the urban heat islands, the pressing water scarcity, the decline of precipitation that most climate models show of 20 to 30%, the decline of river flow in the Nile, which of course would be absolutely devastating for Egypt, the rising sea level, which will affect many countries of the region, the greater intensity dust storms. It's not a pleasant picture at all. It's a quite dramatic picture. Add to this the fact that this is a region that is still beset by many conflicts, by sharp regional differences in situation. Some of the poorest countries in the world are in the region, and some very rich countries are in the region. But the rich countries are typically rich because of hydrocarbons, and that means that those countries have a profound challenge ahead to be a hydrocarbon superpower in a world that is needing to decarbonize by mid-century is not a simple matter. And that is true for the entire Gulf region, obviously. So this is a big challenge. I think that the solutions are, first of all, not easy, but also require an extraordinary degree of cooperation within the region and an extraordinary degree of cooperation between this region, however exactly one defines it, Europe and other parts of the world, including China. And global cooperation is absolutely in short supply. And so this is another great difficulty. This region has to make a massive energy transformation and at the same time combat an absolutely serious and potentially devastating set of impacts from climate change. And to make the energy transition is really only feasible in a broader regional context. Of course, this is a region blessed with sunshine, overblessed with sunshine, blessed with vast solar potential. It could become a superpower of green energy, which I think we should definitely aim at. But for the Middle East to be a superpower of green energy, whether it's exporting electrons over long distance transmission lines to Asia and to Europe, or whether it is exporting green hydrogen, both of which are utterly feasible, requires geopolitics to work. It requires a strategy in which Europe, for example, and China and India and others are working with this region to be part of global supply chains and to build an energy system that is a worldwide energy system, both for green electricity and green fuels that this region could obviously be the center of building. But in recent days, we're going exactly in the opposite direction with the destruction of pipelines and the absolute lack of trust internationally, the collapse of relations, the unthinkable idea that countries should be dependent on electricity coming from long distance transmission. We're really not addressing any of these issues in a serious way right now. In general, in meetings like COP, we should be not only negotiating legal frameworks, but negotiating cooperative frameworks for the actual deployment of new green energy systems. We should have Europe negotiating with the Middle East and North Africa for incorporating those regions into a broader grid. I don't know what taste there is for that right now in a situation where Europe is shell-shocked from the events of recent months, but we actually can't make this decarbonization transformation on an autarkic basis or a one country at a time basis. We also can't make it with an East-West confrontation that is nearly out of control right now, because the Middle East needs to have good relations with China. China's already the major customer of hydrocarbons, but it could also be the major customer of hydrogen and even of electricity over very long distance, high voltage, direct current transmission lines. But in order to bring about a meaningful infrastructure like that, it's hard to see that happening in a militarized and war-like environment. Of course, I would say within the region, there are enough conflicts that are also cutting off avenues of cooperation. I had the poignant experience of visiting the Gulf and visiting Iran in quick succession just before the pandemic. And in both places, I found such similar crises, sandstorms, dust storms, disappearance of surface water, the need for new technological approaches. But instead of cooperation, the region was beset by conflict. If the Israel-Palestine issue were settled in a proper direction, Israel could play a much more constructive role as well in this region, in all aspects of technology and physical connectivity and so forth. And there are many other conflicts that I don't need to belabor the point right now. Also, we see in the really difficult unsolved problem of the major dams being built in Ethiopia and the potential implication for Egypt and the lack of adequate cooperation in the Nile River basin. a similar illustration of the overwhelming need for regional cooperation that isn't taking place, obviously, on an adequate basis. And not to mention Sudan and the implications for Sudan as well. So in summary, I've been working on this issue for more than 20 years and have strongly believed and continue to strongly believe that decarbonization requires long-term plans, first of all, not market miracles, but long-term plans. That's the first point. Second, decarbonization requires trans-border solutions, and that's especially true for this region. Third, the climate agenda, of course, requires serious attention to the adaptation challenges, drying, hotter temperatures, more storms, disappearance of surface water, rising sea levels. And that is a very expensive price tag as well. We're basically not accomplishing almost any of this. For a long time, we left things to a market that is bewildered by this challenge, absolutely unable to address it. And now we don't understand the geopolitical implications of the climate crisis. The geopolitical implications are regions must cooperate, neighbors must cooperate, and major powers must cooperate. There's no place for major power confrontation in this world if we're going to solve this absolutely rapidly deteriorating environmental crisis. And let me just end with the obvious fact that 2022 has demonstrated that there isn't a place in the world that isn't already in the midst of an extreme pounding from damages in real time now. The US being hit by almost a historically harsh hurricane just this past week, the massive drought in China, the soaring temperatures in the Middle East and in India, the mega drought in Europe. This has been a year of devastating shocks, but it's interesting that this is a year in which the warming is being masked in part by the continued La Nina conditions in the Pacific. So when we get out of the La Nina conditions and swing back to an El Nino, we could soar well above 1.4 degrees warming. We could even reach the 1.5 degree warming that is supposed to be our limit within the next few years. My absolutely brilliant and seemingly always correct colleague, Dr. James Hansen, one of the world's great climatologists, suggests that we've already doubled the rate of decadal warming from what was a rate of around 0.18 degrees Celsius between 1980 and 2010 to a rate of about 0.36 degrees Celsius decadal warming currently, which means that because we are above 1.2 degrees warming already, even in a La Nina, we're likely to exceed the 1.5 degree threshold within this decade or by the end of the decade. So the time is short. The emergency is upon us. Markets cannot solve this problem. Only government plans and geopolitical cooperation and a massive mobilization of financial resources and partnership with technologists, engineers, and scientists can address this problem. And I hope that this is really the message at COP27. None of these problems is solved right now. We're wasting our time with wars and conflicts and confrontations that we have no business wasting our time with right now. And I'm absolutely glad that this is being hosted in Egypt. Not only is the government deeply committed to this topic and doing such a superb job, but Egypt needs solutions, and I hope that COP27 helps to deliver them. So thank you for letting me make these brief remarks. Bottom line, let's get around the table and plan what we are doing. And until we do that, we're going to lack solutions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Sachs, for the wonderful introduction and intriguing questions. So this takes me to the second question that I'd like to address to Dr. Mohideen. Based on what Professor Sachs has just mentioned, it makes me think that there is a structural tension between the imperatives of economic growth on the one side and the urgent need to limit pollution and environmental damage on the other. If I take the Egyptian economy as an example, the Egyptian economy needs to grow by 6 to 7% per year to generate enough jobs and economic opportunities for the fast-growing population in Egypt. So in your view, how can this tension be reconciled?
Right. Thank you so much, Rasha, for the kind invitation. Very grateful to the Atlantic Council for this opportunity. I'm very happy to be among the panelists discussing this important topic. It's always a pleasure, and it's tough as well to come after Professor Sachs. He gave a great overview of what's facing our world, our region, and he referred in different ways as well to the challenges and opportunities for a country like Egypt going forward. We learned a lot from Professor Sachs, and just a couple of days ago, I was using one of his contributions to our knowledge on the updates on the state of the SDGs. And you would be seeing that the whole region of MENA, if you take it by color, the team have these colorful arrows. If you are going up vertically, it's green. If you are going down, it's red. And then you have many yellows and oranges. I'm concerned to say that if you see a picture of the 22 Arab countries, the orange, red, and yellow dominates the green. And this includes actually some of the high-income countries in the region when it comes to their performance on the SDGs. Here, the issue of being rich or relatively rich or poor or relatively poor is a matter that needs to be put in a more holistic approach. And actually, in Egypt and many countries in the region have been suffering from a kind of a reductionist approach that dealt with climate as a separate file, as a separate track, and never been included wisely and formally, with few exceptions, in the policy framework, in design of priorities, on the institutional coordination, and indeed on finance. And it has been reported, and we have the evidence even in project-based approaches, that when you pursue green growth, you are creating jobs, but you need really to tailor it in a way that could be suitable of the political economy dynamics and the initial conditions of the country. If we are just going to copy other models, including models that may have succeeded in the other developing economies without paying attention to history, geography, culture, political economy dynamics, will be missing a lot. However, you would expect the following from the COP. And I am reading it, and the participation of Her Excellency Minister Yasmin, I see her name on the list. She will be definitely not just capable, but more relevant to speak about the state track. I'm giving you my reading from a non-state actors as a coordinator of the non-state stakeholders. And we have this title that had been awarded to those who are doing this tough job, as climate champions since Marrakesh Partnership had named us as such. So the first part is basically how to tackle climate within a holistic approach. And that means not just to take the Paris Agreement comprehensively, covering mitigation, adaptation, loss and damage, which between brackets, actually, I see it's still lost in endless discussion. And we hope that the recent appointment by Minister Shukri, the president of the COP, of Chile and Germany to facilitate the discussions on that important file toward the COP will really improve matters better. And at least give us a kind of understanding what should be expected more on this important file. And again, between brackets, you may have read the piece by Professor Jeff Sachs when he described, and that was mentioned during his discussion as well, the case of Pakistan and the requirements of at least 30 billion. Half of that amount is at least to do with climate change. The other half could be because of a year-to-year kind of variability of weather, or because of local practices or malpractices. I encourage you to have a look at this piece, because reading it and other sources would confirm that loss and damage is beyond mitigation and beyond adaptation, and that is ready to be attended to properly. And this is one of the expectations that you might be seeing from this COP, because when you see the actions of the private sector and the non-state actors, it's as good as the state actors get their act together. So you'll see that the private sector and non-state actors doing some good job in mitigation, more investments on that front, because that had been facilitated by partnerships with the public sector and by the advances in negotiations in that front. Less so in adaptation. If you take it even by number, the participants of the race to zero are more than or approximately 12,000 members of the Race to Zero campaign. It's less than a quarter of that figure on adaptation. And the loss and damage, again, we don't really have much to say, but well, there are willingness to do something by insurance companies, by local community leaders. But beyond that, we need to have a better text to move on with. Paris Agreement made the reference, but we need the operationalization of that reference. Yes, we have a mechanism, we have frameworks, we have discussions about loss and damage, but not enough for the state or the non-state actors to do more. And of course, the fourth file and the Paris Agreement of importance and relevance is finance. So it's mitigation, adaptation, loss and damage, and finance. So that is the first building pillar of the discussions in Sharm. I'm saying a pillar because I assume that the foundation is very much the Paris Agreement and the operationalization of Paris Agreement. The second part, and this I can really get it from the spirit and the emphasis of the talk by Professor Sachs again, it's about implementation, how to get these big ideas put into investments of relevance to climate action. And to tell you the truth, when I attended Glasgow and I reviewed briefly the reports coming from developing economies and Africa in particular, the main piece of news that got more attention than others was that promising project for South Africa, phasing out from coal, phasing in into renewables, and dealing with the impact on local communities and providing job opportunities for them. And with a good dollar sign attached to it, 8.5 billion. But we know that this project is still on, and we hope to see some updates on it about its state of progress. But we need more of that, but we need them on fast track. I'm speaking to you from India today, and again, they discovered the beauty of generating jobs through investments in renewables, including solar, wind. They are localizing the efforts as well. They managed to do well in the reduction of emissions, but not as good as they wished it to be, quoting some of the experts in this field that I just met today. So it's a case that we need to scale up, and it's all about technology and finance. Technology and finance. Daniel Yergin, in his recent book, The New Map, is telling us that the just energy transition is not going to be a factor of time as such. It's going to be a factor of technology and finance. We can afford today building these huge solar plants in countries like Morocco or Egypt or India, because the cost today is a fraction of what it used to be 8 or 9 years ago. And we need more of that, because what is required is huge, and we are far from the targets as known from the IPCC reports, and what Professor Sachs as well referred to in terms of the updates coming from the scientists and experts in this field. The third aspect, and again, this is an area that Professor Sachs spoke about when he was in Egypt, in Cairo a few months ago, about the importance of regionalism or regionalization, not as a substitute to global cooperation and international cooperation, but as a facilitator for better cooperation. And Egypt is happy to be in this unique location, part of the Mediterranean, part of the Middle East, part of the Arab countries, part of Africa. And it has excellent relations with all members. And beyond that, again, from India now, great praise of the excellent relations, political, economic, and diplomatic relations that facilitate any kind of discussion and collaboration in the future. With the regional dimension and with great leadership from the president of the COP, Sameh Shukri, and of course, Minister Yasmin supported this initiative from day one, and she spoke in many of these roundtables. DSG, Amina Mohammed, the Secretary General, supported the idea of getting the regional economic commissions working with the champions and the COP presidency. And we have now 4 regional roundtables with great outcomes in terms of project pipelines coming from the 4 regions that are going to be shared during the COP. In all areas of work, adaptation, mitigation, PPPs in infrastructure, and surprise, many people discovered that investment in human capital related to supporting the agenda of climate action, this really to my delight and happiness to see investment in human capital, including education, because you need people to work in these new fields, training, skills, people to be acquainted with the new green economy, including girls. So that is very much the case that we have seen from different regions, including from ESCWA, which covers Arab countries. We have from Latin America a variety of projects. ESCAP provided their best people to work with us on PPPs, and Africa brought a decent list. Some of them are not just country specific, because some of them are sub-regional projects. And we'll have the final round. I hope Minister Yasmin will be with us on that one on the 17th and 18th of this month. Will be in Geneva to discuss the list of emerging Europe and Central Asian countries. So this is the regional aspect. Localization and ownership. We have a unique project. I'm happy to say that Dr. Yasmin, when she saw the plan about the localization, she said, well, I hope that I'm not saying anything wrong, Minister Yasmin, when I'm quoting you, but she said, well, if I can afford it, I would do nothing but just focus on this localization project, picking the smarter and the greener of the projects in a national competition under the auspices of the president, that the prime minister decided is going to be a permanent feature. Every year we are going to be running this competition. This is raising awareness. This is drawing a new map for investment opportunities in Egypt, in all of the governorates. Coming from a rural area myself, people own these kind of competitions and push the agenda further when it comes to opportunity. The final thing is finance, and you may know that I can talk about finance forever, but it's definitely beyond the 100 billion. The 100 billion is important. It's a token of trust that it has to be delivered. But we know from different figures, the most conservative is telling you that the 100 billion will not cover more than 3% of the requirements of developing economies and emerging markets. What we need really is more than that. There is there should be requirements to align development finance with climate finance. And that can answer again your question, because if you do the alignment of finance, public and private, external and domestic, that will really give us a better language of communication than just the rhetoric and generic terms that we use about priorities. The finance provides discipline to our discussion, and it can push matters further, especially if we have the solutions and the technology available. In addition to that, it's known that we are relying heavier on debt instruments rather than equity and concessional finance. We spoke with my good friend Homi Kharas, and Professor Sachs is working on a very important project that was mentioned by the Secretary General of the UN during his speech on Anga about the acceleration of SDGs. That, by the way, includes climate action, but that needs funds and needs better work from development finance institutions. And let me just emphasize here that the current system of funding climate and development is unfair, inefficient, and insufficient. Insufficient because we know that the official development assistance has never been delivered in full. At best, less than 1/3. Climate finance, the 100 billion, has never been submitted in full. At best, 80% if you believe the way that and the metric and methodology of calculating the funds. So we need to go beyond that. We need to be more ambitious. We need to align development finance with climate finance, and we need really to deal with the concerns related to additionality. And we need as well to see ways on how to reduce the reliance on debt, including through debt reduction mechanisms. There are new breed of swaps that could help us, and that is going to be discussed on the Finance Day, the third day. We need to build carbon credit markets, and I'm happy to tell you that Africans are not going to be recipients of ideas alone. They will share ideas, including the good work by the Gabon in developing a carbon credit market and benefiting from their location and the forests in order to build a carbon credit market that serves the nationals of countries rather than serving alone the international markets. It will be aligned with the international standards, but it will prioritize national benefits. There is a great deal of talk about greenwashing and investment in ESG. Is going to be tackled through a new report prepared by Minister McKenna and former Minister McKenna and her team, as assigned by the Secretary General. And that is going to be, I hope, providing some approaches and pathways in dealing with ESG and the greenwashing and dealing with the pledges of the private sector. The final part is basically how to align the SDGs finance with the budgets of the state. And there is a bigger role required in this area, bearing in mind that the heavy lifting, despite our talk forever about external finance and the IFIs, the heavy lifting, including from the low-income countries and low-middle-income countries of Africa, is coming from the state, is coming from the budget of the state, especially, of course, on the adaptation. More than 97% of adaptation finance comes from public sources. 3% or so are from the private sector. As you can see then, with these 5 pillars, the holistic approach, implementation, regional dimensions, localization, and the different aspects of finance, we'll be seeing a very rich agenda. It's not a state and non-state actors, it's the complementarity between the different stakeholders. And we wish to see solutions coming more from a COP that claims from the very beginning that it's going to be an implementation COP. Over to you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Mahmoud. Super interesting points here on making the linkages between economic growth, local development, and climate. And here, everyone is now so eager to hear Her Excellency, Dr. Yasmin Fuad. Since all eyes will be on Sharm el-Sheikh in just a few weeks, and Egypt has this huge responsibility and important role to play through its presidency of COP27, considering also that Egypt is the first African Middle Eastern country to host this important event. The focus of COP27 this year is Africa. Can you please elaborate more on what we should expect from COP this year? What is Egypt's agenda? What does Africa need? What is the main highlight of this COP?
Okay, thank you very much, Rasha, for that question. But these are actually three questions, 3 in 1. So let me first greet Professor Jeffrey Sachs, and I know Dr. Mahmoud is leaving for a travel. But actually, we have 3 parts of that question. What are the expectations of the COP? 2, what's Africa? What are the needs for Africa? And 3, what's Egypt is doing? So those are 3 big bulks, but I'll try to make it more focused with quick messages. We are in the middle of the process, and here is part of that. That's the pre-COP in DRC. Taking place right now. And the reason why I'm starting with that, because that's the whole thing that Professor Sachs was talking about when we're talking about regional cooperation and regional integration. Let me first give an overall what's happening here, because we're closing. We had an interesting 2 days of discussion on loss and damage, on finance, mitigation, and adaptation. These discussions were very useful among us as ministers, because it does bring us closer to what the COP27 for implementation can look like. What is the architecture for that? On adaptation, we know that the work program for adaptation would be for 2 years. It should be finalized in COP28 in UAE. But we wanted to have more in-depth discussion on how that work program and the framework for the GGA would look like. So there was an agreement that discussion that will take place on the COP should provide some guidance to the process of the formulation of the GGA. And that process would include its definition, how can we review the targets, and how can we enhance both action and support. Most of the countries here, part of that discussion, talked about adaptation and doubling adaptation finance. How can we fulfill that, especially in a world that is suffering from geopolitics, from economic crisis in 2022, and we don't put the climate crisis as a second priority. On finance, we had that discussion on the new collective goal on finance, provide some guidance to that. We talked about the quantity, the sources, and how can the MDBs can still be part of that process, and trying to de-risk the projects related to adaptation, because we need to come up with that adaptation and mitigation. On the loss and damage, there was an agreement on the operationalization of the San Diego network, which provides the technical assistance to the countries. But there was some kind of a discussion that I hope would bring us closer before the COP to an agenda item on the loss and damage and the funding of the loss and damage, and how can we start at least a dialogue into that. And that's the bottleneck that is there. 2 weeks ago, there was a workshop in Egypt that we tried to collect the negotiators to bring them closer to each other. So as an overall, a COP27 that's taking place, or a pre-COP27 that's taking place in a DRC in a 2022 world of an energy crisis, of a food security crisis, of an economic crisis, with those issues, we're trying to put our hands together. I do agree on one thing on the regional cooperation and part of the UNFCCC process, and how Professor Sachs has talked about the transboundary solution. He talked about the decarbonization, which is a very long journey for all countries, and how can we really work harder on that. I'd like here to present one important part. Maybe it's It's there on the website of the COP27, but maybe it's not as clear as I would like to explain it here. Part of the COP27 as a COP for implementation is the presidency program. The way we designed the presidency program is that you would find the sectors that is affected and affects climate change. So we have the energy, the water, the agriculture, the biodiversity, and the decarbonization sector, which is new to the climate dialogue, which is the steel, the iron, the cement, and the oil and gas, on how best they can get involved in the dialogue for a decarbonization. And these are the sectors that we think would be important to discuss. How can implementation come into reality and accelerate the process of affordable technologies within those sectors? But we also have what I always say, the vertical part, which is the human beings, how they are affecting the planet and how they can really build up to reduce the speed process of climate change. And here we have dedicated days for civil society and ACE, for youth, for women, as well as for the science, where the academic has to be brought together. Why I'm talking about those thematic days and the way they were designed, because if you see the horizontal and the vertical, you can find that the COP for implementation could provide an opportunity and a venue for a human-centered COP. A COP that brings the human needs at the heart of the climate discussion, and how can that be done? And that changed the narrative of the way we've been functioning since not only 2015, since 1992. And that has to be part of not only putting forward the agenda, but also how can we implement that? And for Egypt to do that, we felt that the design of the thematic days would need the meat and bones. And the meat and bones here would mean the initiatives that we're trying to put for Africa. And here I'm answering the question for Africa. When we're talking about just an affordable energy transition for Africa, when we're talking about the biodiversity and how nature-based solution can change the life for Africa, when talking about the global waste initiative, 50 by 2050, waste has not been a part of our internal discussion of the COPs and the climate, although it generates a large amount of greenhouse gas, especially if we put the methane as part of that discussion. But yet, waste can be a good opportunity for injecting investment in Africa, for providing more extended producer responsibility, green jobs for the informal sector that would work with the municipal, especially with the municipal solid waste. And that initiative is something that we look forward to launch by the COP, because 10% only or less is only treated in Africa, and yet the other 50 could be reached by 2050. And we have the most important part, which is the adaptive capacity of the women. Gender and adaptive capacity is a crucial process for the whole world. The woman is the most vulnerable to that. How can we link the discussion not only on the policy level, but how can we link, for an example, the vulnerability of the woman to be more resilient through strengthening the economic opportunities and education? So here I'm tackling the resilience of the woman from the practical experience of job opportunities and the education part. And there are others. We're talking even about nature-based solutions. This discussion is really crucial, not because only the COP27 is few weeks from now, but the world cannot sustain the way we're treating it in delinking the land, the biodiversity, and the climate. They were born together in 1992, and we've been treating them very badly in a way that we're discussing each one of them alone. And then we come and ask ourselves and say why we're not producing, why we cannot save our planet, because we have done this. So part of the thematic day is linking the climate and the biodiversity nexus and sustainable land management at the heart of that discussion, where we're bringing Sharm el-Sheikh partnership on nature-based solution. But here you're talking about the restoration of both the people and the ecosystem, because they have to still be together. And that would lead us to a very important milestone, which is the post-2020 framework, the CBD convention that will take place in December. And all this part, food security and food transformation is part of that. Even when we're talking about the COP for implementation, I was just presenting the initiatives and the thematic days to my fellow colleagues here in DRC. And I felt that part of that discussion, when we're talking about how can we really fight climate, is that we never started with ourselves. Let me give a very good example here. How are our nutrition habits are taking place? Are we going for low carbon practices and low carbon food, or we keep discussing that inside the venue and the convention, and then we go outside and eat very normally? This is one of the things that Egypt is bringing, which is what we call I can. I can mean how can we change our nutrition habit for the linkages between climate and what we eat. And we're trying to build that within the convention center on low carbon food practices that we're trying to promote during the COP. So we don't feel like discrepancy between what we're calling for inside the rooms and outside our practice is not really the best that we can lead on. Last but not least, how Egypt is performing within all that. Egypt has been on the right track for what we call a just energy, a just green transition since a few years ago, when we decided to redirect the way we're looking at the environment and the climate to be isolated from the overall policy development process. And from that, we started to link it to the economy. For example, we have announced our first environmental sustainability criteria for greening our own budget during the pandemic, which means that we're reaching 100% of our projects to be green projects. But that was not enough on the climate. So we started working on the climate strategy that we announced for 2050. We updated our NDC. Even when you see how Egypt is dealing with the COP, it's not only the COP president and the COP envoy, it's not the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Ministry of Environment, because that is not the right direction of doing things. If we want climate to mainstream, we have to start by ourselves. So having other ministries on board, like agriculture, like water, like finance, like planning, like oil and gas, and like industry, is a very important message that should be delivered around the world. We cannot fight the climate only if we keep ourselves locked in our rooms talking about the same matters. Finally, with our process of working on a climate strategy and working on an NDC, we have that big project of the $2 billion USD, which is the Bimban project, which is the largest solar park. We're embarking on a green hydrogen and having more of a green corridor in Egypt in that part. And we're aiming also on a major policy of the electrification of the transport sector. And we got an ambitious target of a 70% reduction of the greenhouse gases from the transport sector in our NDC. And last but not least, we have redrafted once again the way we deal with our waste management. So we issued our first waste management law that focuses on a circular economy, on more opportunities for the business sector. We had announced our first feed-in tariff for the waste to energy, where the business sector would be part of that discussion, and that's part of the climate discussion. And we provided the first green incentives through our investment law, focusing on renewable energy, green hydrogen, e-mobility, and alternative to single-use plastic. Last but not least, we're focusing so much on the youth and the school children. So part of the transformation that Egypt is going through is, for example, building on curriculum on climate change and biodiversity to be part of our reform educational system, and training the teachers that work in the governmental school on how to integrate climate. Secondly, how can we integrate climate within the curriculum that would be multidisciplinary for the governmental universities there in Egypt? And last but not least, how can the public be informed? So with the COP, we have launched what we call our first national climate dialogue, going at the level of the rural communities, at the local communities, to understand how climate affects their life, how best can we change that, what kind of, for example, local adaptation projects that we can do to them, and they would be part of that process. That's a whole change that's happening at the national level, institutionally, policy, investment, and at the local level in Egypt on how can we push the climate agenda. And the last message that I would like to say is that the climate agenda would be pushed if we change the way we're dealing with them since 2015. The climate has to be mainstreamed as part of the economic and the social. Those decision makers has to be part of the discussion. And in order to make it inclusive, you really get some good ideas out of the box and let the public feel that they are part of that. For example, Egypt is doing the first human hub during the COP27 in the green zone. We're bringing the artists, the fashions, and the musician to be part of the discussion because we believe that they can change climate change in the way they have their influencing the public. I hope I was able to capture everything.
You've done a wonderful job.
Thank you very much, Josh.
Thank you, Your Excellency. This is absolutely ambitious and very interesting to see, again, those linkages between human development, climate, and vice versa. COP27 seems to be a wonderful example for that. And this takes me to go to the next question that I'd like to address to Ambassador Majid Al-Suwaidi. The previous speakers all discussed the importance of integration, economic integration, regional cooperation. And now we have two COP events being hosted in the region, in Egypt and in the UAE. How can Egypt and the UAE together maximize the benefits from hosting two consecutive COP events in the region? And what is the agenda for COP28? And how does this compare with COP27?
Thank you very much. It's so great to be here. First of all, I want to thank you for organizing this event. I know you put in a lot of hard work for, and it's a pleasure to be here. And thank the Atlantic Council. I also do want to note that we're very proud that we'll be the second COP within the Arab region, and I think it reflects the importance that the Arab region places on this issue, on climate change, and the value that our people and our thought leaders, our leadership in this region place on this issue and the importance of it. And as you know, the UAE has a long track record of engagement on climate change issues. We have for a very long time been investing in renewable energy, promoting energy efficiency, promoting climate change policies within the UAE domestically. And I think that this, we've certainly seen that this has been the trend within the Arab region, that it just makes sense for many of our economies to think about how climate change will not only affect our economies, but also how there can be opportunity. I think that the story of the UAE was that our leadership recognized very early that climate change was a threat, but also an opportunity to engage our population in a conversation about how we move our economy away from oil and gas and into and focus on diversifying our economy, which of course is very good for us in terms of creating jobs for young people, creating new opportunities, new industries for the huge young population that we have that's growing here in the UAE. And as you know, also the UAE is a hub for people from all over the region. We have 1/3 of the world's population within a 4-hour flight. Many of them come here to live and open businesses, to raise their families, and so on and so forth. And so really the UAE is a country that has grown really rapidly. And thinking about sustainability, thinking about climate change has been something that was there from the very beginning of our country. His Highness, the late Sheikh Zayed bin Sultan Al Nahyan, the president and one of the founding fathers of our country, really instilled of our environmental stewardship and awareness in the country. And that has been sort of the basis on which we've grown our country and grown our economy. Not many people know that we were one of the first countries in the world to stop flaring, to try to have a zero flaring policy, to use natural gas in our electrification system. We've, as you know, invested heavily in renewable energy as part of our diversification strategy. We've built Masdar City which is a net zero carbon city. So our country in many ways has walked the walk when it comes to climate change policy, climate change action, and also in our investments and foreign aid, where we've been partnering with countries around the world to deliver technologies and to deliver projects that address climate change. And so it's from that lens that we come to bid to host the COP, because we think that we can add a value proposition to this conversation. As you know, our COP is tasked with delivering the global stocktake, which is no small task. And we are really grateful for our Egyptian colleagues who are doing such a wonderful job in trying to pull together so many of the different important issues. And I have no doubt, and from the few interactions I've had with their team, as I just started, I've been so impressed with the caliber of team that they have, the understanding and knowledge of the issues, and their engagement when it comes to the climate change discussion, and feel very, very confident that the Egyptian presidency will really deliver some really great outcomes that will then carry over for us and hopefully make our job a lot easier. I'm extremely very impressed by their team and the great work that they're doing. For us, it's about what kind of global stocktake will there be? What will that look like? And then what are we as countries going to say about the next steps forward? What are we going to be doing to make sure that we hit that 1.5 degree goal? And what are the actions that we can all be taking? You know, based on what I described to you, we're a kind of solutions-based country. We're a country that loves to tackle big problems and come up with solutions. And so we would like our COP to really focus on how it can be a solutions COP, how it can be a COP that brings in many different actors, many different players to find and solve some of these important and serious challenges that we're facing today. The other area where we, of course, want to make sure that we are really focused is and related to that point that I'm just making is inclusion, making sure that all the voices are heard, making sure we have representation for youth, for indigenous people, for farmers, for all the many different voices or non-state actors that are part of the process and are an important part of the process for these policies and these actions to become successful on the ground. We as governments can do all the talking that we like, but if it doesn't translate into something that reflects the needs of the people on the ground, or is relevant to the environment that they live in, the climate that they live in, the natural resources that are available to them, then it can mean nothing. We have to start to think about how these solutions work on the ground and what can we be doing to promote those solutions, be it through finance, through projects, through resources, through technology, through the many, many different avenues that we have and tools that we have in place to try to promote climate change solutions. So that level of inclusivity, making sure that youth, making sure that these different groups are at the table and having a voice is something that we really want to focus on, and we want to try to deliver in our COP to make sure that the maximum number of people who are interested in this process can feel engaged and can come away with practical solutions that they can take home to their countries and hopefully implement for the way forward. We obviously are an energy country, so we will want to talk about energy, renewable energy, the energy transition. Other countries might want to talk about other things related to, say, agriculture or water or so on. We want to allow lots of space for different actors with different issues to come forward and talk about their issues and try and find those solutions and hopefully reflect those in the outcome that you have from Abu Dhabi. Adaptation is going to be a very important topic for us. We recognize and see firsthand that there are many countries in the world, including our own, who are seeing the impacts of climate change today and that are suffering the consequences of that. We need to start to think seriously about how we develop meaningful outcomes that address adaptation that help countries to address the many challenges that they're facing, and we'll start to have practical solutions that help them to not only develop and raise their people out of poverty, but also find prosperity and deal with the challenges that they are facing that weren't necessarily of their own making. And so we have to come forward with real serious solutions and have that balance with the mitigation effort. Of course, mitigation is the main way that we're going to address the challenge of climate change and reach our 1.5 goal. But we can't do that at the expense of those people who are suffering right now. And we have to try to think about how we address the problems that they have in a meaningful way. And so that's going to be through a lot of creative thinking, a lot of hard work. And so our goal is to bring as many people together throughout the year, next year, and try to convene as many conversations as we can have, and then have the parties and all of those people be involved, see their thoughts and ideas reflected in the final outcome in the UAE. And of course, we hope everybody will come away satisfied. That's my number one task at the moment, is to pull our effort together. And we're very fortunate that we have our Egyptian colleagues who are helping with us with that. And of course, the UK government is also, we've learned a lot from their experience. And so we're very, very excited to host COP and looking forward to hosting you all here in the UAE.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Assouli. We're also very excited to see the 2 COP events happening in the region. That's super exciting, and it's definitely reflecting a strong message of commitment of leaders in the region being committed to the cause. Dr. Wahba, at the core of the decade running to 2030 is the need for action to tackle growing poverty, women empowerment, and climate emergencies. Are there some countries in the MENA region, some sectors or some groups that are more resilient than others or more vulnerable than others in terms of economic and social consequences of climate? And if so, why?
Well, thank you very, very much, Rasha, for this question. And thank you and the Atlantic Council for inviting me to take part in this event. I have to say I'm humbled by the previous speakers and to be in their presence, because we've learned so much from Professor Sachs. We've had exciting intellectual conversations with Mahmoud Muhyiddin, and of course, Minister Fouad's leadership is, I think, essential to us all who are working in this field. Let me perhaps start, and I realize the time is running, so I'm trying to be very quick. Let me perhaps start by a few of the dismal facts about the region, which is that the MENA region collectively is accountable for about 8% of global emissions. And yet, the MENA region is suffering possibly at twice the rate of other countries, the impact of climate change. And this can be seen both in the increasing droughts, but also flash floods that we've seen in the region, in increasing salinity of the soil, in reduction in the availability of water, and in the increasing dependence on food imports. So that's where we have a group of climate migrants in the region today, of which, and I have to say thank you, Minister Fouad, but 80% of these climate migrants are women. And it's very important that Minister Fouad brings their issues to the fore. Now, as a region, therefore, there is a very high vulnerability to climate change. There's also, by the way, a high vulnerability throughout the southern Mediterranean to the rise in sea levels, with the Mediterranean rising at about twice the rate of, say, the Atlantic Ocean. And this affects, again, agricultural productivity. So I absolutely take the point that the Climate Change Convention, the Biodiversity Convention, the Soils Convention really have to be seen as one unit arising out of Rio. The 3 conventions do work together. In terms, therefore, that's the sort of dismal picture. And I could go through the countries, but I think they're quite well known, the issues there. What I would like to focus on, and a point which previous speakers have addressed already, is the need for solutions. Ambassador Majid said it most recently, but also we have Professor Sachs, Mahmoud, Minister Fouad discussing the need for implementation, the need for bringing the agreements on climate change down to the ground level and to really see some progress there. And there, I believe that we have a tool in the nationally determined contributions of each country. We have quite a strong number of these NDCs, 169, of which 98% include adaptation issues, of which 85% have agriculture and 90% the protection of nature. So there is an integration path towards really moving to climate-sensitive development solutions in the Middle East. Are there examples? Yes, of course there are examples. And I'm thinking, for instance, of the more positive elements there, whereby the MENA region receives, say, about a quarter of the sun's energy in the world. And therefore you have solar power arrays in the UAE, and Ambassador Majid was absolutely correct there. In Egypt, of course, with the Bin Ban power station, but I think most impressively, if I may, in Morocco, with the world's largest CSP array today. And interestingly, in Morocco, the training on the maintenance of solar heaters, for instance, is focused directly on providing jobs for women. So that's really a climate progress and jobs, and specifically jobs for women, it can go hand in hand. And I believe that Sharm el-Sheikh will demonstrate how this progress is possible. A few other examples, perhaps, of good practices, which I'd like to bring to your attention. In Tunisia, I think coastal zone management, again, a manual on coastal zone management on the protection from the rising levels of the Mediterranean is focused on the role of women in particular. In Egypt, the Kafr el-Sheikh sort of reed protection for the coast is again very important and shows the importance of listening to local initiatives that previous speakers have mentioned. So that if I were to speak very quickly and perhaps to summarize where we can go with Sharm el-Sheikh, I believe that Sharm el-Sheikh, the COP27, is going to provide the background for practical, innovative solutions based on three principles. First, ambition. We must go further, we must go faster than we have been going today. And that includes both mitigation efforts as well as adaptation examples. A second area is integration. Integration of the three Rio Conventions, but also integration of climate action with development imperatives. And I think there, the NDCs and making these NDCs real into projects can show a way forward. And thirdly, and perhaps I believe most importantly, is the need to localize the knowledge we have. We have a lot of knowledge. Minister Fouad talked about knowledge in Africa. We're talking about knowledge locally in Egypt, in Morocco, in Tunisia, in the UAE, that can be brought to bear in form of finding new solutions to our climate issues. And finally, because I'm going to say this again and again, and I believe it's crucial, the role of women in climate change, not only as victims, but really as actors towards new solutions for climate change is crucial. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wahba. Your notes are definitely spot on. And actually, just as a reminder, youth represent about 70% of the population in the region, and women are half the population. So like key elements should really be focusing on women and the youth particularly. And Now I'd like to take this question to Mr. Pawlowski and think more about the role that the philanthropic institutions can play to promote the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development generally, but also mostly in the MENA region. What is the strategy that Rockefeller Foundation uses to allocate funds, maybe based on ESG determinants and impact investing, and how can this help?
Sure, and thank you very much for having me, and thanks to the Atlantic Council, a great partner of the Rockefeller Foundation, and honored to be with the Dr. Ambassador, the envoy, the minister. It's an incredible panel, a testament to Atlantic Council's reach and diversity. Look, the world is facing an incredible array of challenges: the Ukrainian war, the droughts that have been referenced, the climate crisis that we all know about. There also is a debt crisis that hasn't been talked about a lot today, and I think that the president of the World Bank said that almost 50% of the LICs are facing debt distress already, or will be very shortly, and so that's an incredible number. And of course, the food security crisis that comes out of the Ukrainian war, and the droughts and the climate change that we're facing. It's a huge challenge. And frankly, it's not surprising that the Secretary General in his most recent speech talked about rescuing the SDGs, because in fact, if we're going to achieve them, they are going to need rescuing. So it's a real full plate that is before governments, before private sector, before philanthropies. And if you look at the climate question, it really is one of those questions that faces the developing world quite directly. But it is not something that can be left to just the developing and emerging economies. Statistics that we've looked at the Rockefeller Foundation suggest that, based on the IEA net zero pathway, coal use must fall by half a decade to stay on track for 1.5, which would mean electricity generation needs to increase by 40% in the same period. Doing both at the same time is an incredible challenge. And what could happen is that we would have a situation where that happens in the developed world, and in the developing world, we end up with the 81 emerging and developing economies producing a third of global emissions by 2030, about 34%, and up to 77% by 2050. If the developed countries decarbonize and the developing countries are left in the dust. So that's an incredible challenge that we face. And it's been acknowledged, frankly, by world leaders. I think, most recently, Secretary Yellen, the Treasury Secretary of the United States, talked about trillions, not billions. And she's not the only one, obviously, but it's important to see how we address that gap. And Mahmoud was exactly right when he said that we need to align climate and development finance. And so that comes to your question, Rasha, which is what is the philanthropic role? What I would say to that is I think the Rockefeller view, but not Rockefeller alone, is that philanthropy does have an important role. It is one that you could talk about in terms of public-private partnerships, and I know several on this panel have mentioned PPPs, but I don't think that's the only place in which the philanthropy has a role. Philanthropy also has a role as being the risk capital, the sort of brave catalytic capital that goes into places where either the private sector or governments are a little hesitant to do, and where philanthropy can take the risk. But that has challenges to it. The philanthropy can't be simply underwriting costs that private sector doesn't want to do until they can make a profit. And so it can't simply be that we sort of offer the capital that makes companies more profitable, right? It has to be a partnership where the risk is shared. The other thing is, and where philanthropies are, quite capable of doing is being able to fail. That is something that is very, very important. It's not well accepted in the private sector and in government, certainly. I think the private sector in Silicon Valley would tell you that their success rate is based on failure, right? But in the Middle East, I think that's a little bit less accepted, right? That bankruptcy and failure are looked down upon, not as a learning experience necessarily, but as a sign of a path not to take. And I think that's something that we have to work on. I think it's improved dramatically over the last 2 decades, but it's something that I still think needs improvement. I can tell you from the Rockefeller standpoint, we have put our money where our mouth is. On the global, recently at the last COP, we launched the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet. We put 500 million behind that big bet. We also partnered with the IKEA Foundation and the Bezos Earth Foundation to create a nucleus of over $1 billion of philanthropic capital, and then aligned a lot of MDB and IFI money around it, accumulating almost well over 10 billion to address emissions, to address green growth, and to address economic route out for the developing world. And it's going to be focused on technology and a pipeline of green energy projects. The second one is the Zero Gap Fund, where we have taken 25 million and turned it into well over 582 million in terms of leveraged amounts, which is well over 32 times a multiple. And so those are 2 places where we've definitely put our money where our mouth is. We're certainly not the only ones doing it, but I think that is the way in which we fulfill the commitment that our president, Dr. Raj Shah, has made towards being catalytic, to being brave, to taking risks that the rest of the world is looking at with some hesitance. And I can tell you, Rockefeller has a history of doing that. We failed in agriculture in Mexico. We trying for 10 years to do something that would increase yields. And at the very end, we were successful in helping folks invent dwarf wheat. And so that, but it took 10 years of failure to get there. And so we have to be ready to do that. And you asked about what the strategy is and how do you get there. I think it's very important that, when you're doing this, when you're trying to attract capital, when you're trying to have investments, that you be transparent. You have measures of impact that are looked at and evaluated by external partners that are independent and can give you an honest appraisal and do it transparently. And so that's part of the success quotient. And if you aren't prepared to do that, your success is going to be cabined. And your willingness to find partners willing to invest is going to be cabined, because in those situations where you're not transparent and you're not prepared to fail and you're not having independent outside evaluators, the skepticism about doing this, because everybody has an ESG fund, everybody has an opportunity that they're waiting for you to jump into, but you have to convince them that to get over that skepticism by being open and transparent about what you're doing. So, but there's lots of opportunity, as the doctor just said, and I think philanthropy has a definite role in it.
That's absolutely key, and the role of impact investing, not only in the region but globally, is on the rise. The region has not been able yet to sort of capture most of the motion, but hopefully this will happen, especially now with the 2 events being hosted in the region. This will bring more attention to the cause, including impact, among other developmental goals. So absolutely fascinating discussion, and I'm sure that the audience feels very confident now that all the panelists are going to be also key leads in the COP discussions this year and next year. And there's no better time than today to address the need for promoting sustainable and equitable economic growth in the region. I would like to remind the audience that one of the main characteristics of the region is the size of its human capital, with a total population of over 170 million people, and an annual population growth rate of 1.7%, which is actually higher than average. 2/3 of the MENA population are under 35, representing the future of this region. So we really need to be able to mobilize resources to invest in people, their education, health, well-being, and environment in order to turn this human capital potential of the MENA region into real economic power. Thanks to all our distinguished panel for this fascinating discussion we had today. This discussion will certainly continue in the context of the MENA region and beyond. Thanks to the audience for joining us today, and until very soon. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.